Blake feared the man who had taken Aurak may escape, particularly since the tracking signal Aurak was sending had stopped. However, she knew she had to deal with the immediate threat of the two renegades that had now crossed her path.
Are you going to answer him?
The smaller man twitched his gun at her.
All right. My name is Lou.
Blake deliberately omitted her surname when trying to keep her family identity a secret. Villa felt a pang of sympathy towards her, as his naturally kind nature sensed the young woman was scared. He knew Gouda Prime was no place for anyone on their own. As his empathy kicked in, he smiled.
I'm Villa. Why are you here?
Blake thought quickly.
Villa, it couldn't be, could it?
She knew that what was left of Roger's crew had made their way to Gouda Prime, and Aurak was here as well, so it couldn't be a coincidence. It must be him. She looked at Tarrant, trying to work out who he might be, but to no avail. Tarrant stared at Villa and wondered why, even after all these years of survival on Gouda Prime, he still could not resist an apparently innocent young woman. Tarrant turned back to Blake and again raised his gun towards her.
Now, for the last time, are you going to tell us why you're here, or am I going to end this conversation bluntly by shooting you?
I was abandoned here, a political refugee originally from the planet Exbar.
She went with an explanation as close to the truth as she dared, and feeling it was her best chance of survival.
Exbar?
Do you know it?
Tarrant's eyes didn't leave Blake.
Yeah, Blake. Blake had family there. We went there once. That was a long time ago. Mostly nice people, apart from a few that were after power. You know, usual thing.
Where exactly are you going all the way out here in Plantation 12, and why?
Blake felt the tip of Tarrant's gun on the side of her head. Seeing her opportunity, she decided to trust her theory that the other man was Villa, the man who Rog had travelled with all those years ago.
I am here because I have been contacted by a device that at least one of you, Villa, should know very well.
Tarrant and Villa glanced at each other, bemused.
A device? What device would I know? I don't like devices. Cold, callous things. What device?
A very useful device called Aurak.
Blake watched them, gauging their reaction. Both Villa and Tarrant were stunned into silence. Tarrant for a moment seemed to hear the echo of the young woman's words in his mind, but spoken by another, quite different voice. He desperately tried to hold on to the fragment of memory, but it was gone again before he could place it.
Aurak? But he's been missing for the last 30 years. I knew that sneaky madman would hide it so he could keep it for himself.
Villa!
Tarrant interrupted and shot Villa a warning glare before turning an equally stern visage towards Blake.
Assuming it is Aurak, exactly what were you planning to do with it if you're marooned and helpless, as you say you are?
Sensing a slide into dangerous territory, and realizing that with every passing moment the man who had found Aurak was moving further away, Blake decided to match Tarrant's briskness with some of her own.
If you want answers, I suggest you shut up and we get after the man who's got Aurak before he gets too far away.
Tarrant kept his gun trained on Blake, grimly gesturing for Villa to follow.
All right, let's get moving. I'd suggest no tricks or sudden moves on your part, Lou, or whatever your name really is. In which direction was this man heading before we interrupted you?
Blake let out a shaky breath, relieved that for the moment neither Tarrant nor Villa seemed eager to kill her. She gestured in the direction she had last seen the man carrying Aurak. Walking a few steps forward in the direction Blake indicated, Tarrant glanced down at the ground for a moment. Then, seeing what he was looking for, indicated they should start moving. Blake took that opportunity to try and gain some trust and break the tense atmosphere. She nudged Villa and pointed at Tarrant.
What the hell is he doing?
The ground's damp enough. And that man, he's going to leave traces. Especially if he's not being careful. Tarrant's one of the best trackers on Gouda Prime. It's a useful skill. Of course, it's not as elegant as picking locks.
When Villa smiled, he looked much younger and mischievous.
So that's Tarrant, then? Del Tarrant?
Blake smiled at Villa, recalling the name from her research into her cousin and his crew's adventures. Villa shook his head in frustration at himself.
Oh, me and my mouth. Look, just stay quiet and let's do as Tarrant says, for both our sakes.
Tarrant glanced back and saw Blake and Villa conversing.
Less talking and more movement if we want to catch up with Aurak. Whoever's got him is moving fast, but not bothering to cover his tracks. We should have him in view in a few minutes.
The three of them began walking rapidly in the direction Tarrant indicated, stopping periodically for Tarrant to glance at the ground or examine a bent or broken branch. After a few minutes, he suddenly gestured for the others to stop and be silent. A few 100 yards away, the man Blake had seen was moving purposefully. They followed a short distance through a densely forested area until the man's destination came into view in the shape of a small planet hopper. Tarrant turned quickly to Villa and Blake, smiling broadly for the first time. Blake was struck by how handsome he must have been when he was younger.
My God, Villa, after all these years, I think we may finally have a way off Gouda Prime.
The man they had been tailing finally came into view carrying Aurak.
Is it Aurak?
Yes, it's Aurak. He must have buried it out here. It's been hidden right under our noses all these years.
He, being Avon. Am I right, Tarrant?
Blake looked at him mischievously. Tarrant raised his gun menacingly towards Blake. He didn't smile back. Villa put his hand on the top of Tarrant's gun and lowered it.
I slipped up and told her your name. I'm sorry. But there's no need for all this animosity, is there? She's on her own, and there are all these strange going on.
The conversation was cut short as the white outline of three figures shimmered into view, as if from nowhere, the outlines quickly forming into a trio of humanoids. Blake noticed that the man they were following immediately jumped to take cover behind a large tree. Tarrant and Villa looked at each other in astonishment, with Villa looking particularly perplexed. The figures that had appeared were two men dressed in black military-type uniforms, and a blonde woman who didn't look quite human due to the silvery sheen of her skin. The three of them noticed the planet hopper, and the woman seemed to pause for a moment, touching a silver disc in the middle of her forehead, as if receiving guidance. Abruptly, the woman issued an instruction of some kind to the two guards, who drew two rod-shaped devices from a holster at their sides, and entered the ship through the door that had been left open. The woman remained outside the ship, as the two guards attacked consoles inside the planet hopper with their weapons, obviously damaging the interior as flashes and sparks of light were clearly visible through the doorway. The two guards re-emerged from the ship as the alien woman looked at a device she was carrying. The three of them walked for a moment, and then adjusted their direction before setting off towards the cluster of large trees where the man in possession of Aurak was hiding.
You know what their arrival looked like, don't you, Tarrant? It's all a bit hazy, but I think I recognise the one in the silver uniform. Or at least what she is.
Yes, it looked like they teleported. But they can't have, can they? And who or what is it that you recognise, Villa?
I thought their space station was destroyed, but it looks like an altar, Tarrant.
Villa paused and took a breath, realising the explanation would probably mean nothing to Tarrant or Blake. He gathered his thoughts and steadied his voice.
The altars were the servants of an alien computer complex. It was called the System. It built the Liberator. Look, I know it all sounds ridiculous, but it explains the teleporting.
In that case, they probably have an even better ship than that thing over there. And this is our best chance of ever getting off this rock.
With that, Tarrant jumped out from his cover and ran towards the three figures.
Oh no, here we go.
Villa drew his gun and ran after Tarrant, followed closely by Blake, her mind reeling from the events of the last few hours. It seemed like the universe was testing her, and leaving no option but to play along and see how things turned out. Tarrant, with the others a few paces behind him, rushed towards the outer guards. Blake was genuinely surprised at how swiftly the two older men moved. One of the black-clad soldiers spun round, weapon drawn, when he heard the sudden commotion. The guard fired, and Tarrant dived to the ground, returning fire as he landed, his military instincts, sharpened by years of encounters with bounty hunters and renegades, alerted him to the shot aimed at him, even before his mind registered what was happening. The first guard crumpled, mortally wounded, even as the second guard raised his weapon. Before the second soldier could fire, Villa took him out with an expertly placed shot to the head. Meanwhile, Blake took aim at the silvery figure of the altar, who had dropped suddenly near the bodies of the two fallen guards. Blake felt a moment of confusion, disbelieving for a split second that she had fired. Then she saw the figure of the tall man they had been tracking emerge from cover, his weapon still drawn. Tarrant jumped up quickly and kept his gun trained on the advancing stranger, who was carrying the transparent plastic box, Aurak. The two men stopped a few yards apart, glaring at each other, with a look reminiscent of her time with the sometimes trigger-happy young freedom fighters she had run off with years ago. One wrong move, and the shooting would start again, and Blake, already shaken more than she cared to admit by the events of the last few hours, decided it was time to intervene.
Now, boys, play nicely. We don't need the body count to go any higher before we at least introduce ourselves.
Blake gave a broad smile and a fake bravado she hoped the others would believe. The man looked at Blake for a moment, and then, somewhat to her surprise, he proceeded to ignore her and talk instead to the plastic box.
Aurak, please explain who these people are and why they've shown up so conveniently at this particular moment.
Because I requested their presence. Knowing the inefficiency of humans, it would have been illogical to only send out one distress call. Therefore, I contacted several feasible sources of rescue. I congratulate you all on exceeding my expectations of your limited capabilities and finding me so quickly. Now, please proceed to remove me from this planet immediately.
Good old Aurak. Still as charming as ever.
A look of intense annoyance came over the tall man's features, and he swiftly took out a small device that he inserted into the computer's side.
This voice only.
He glared at Tarrant, Villa, and Blake, who still had their guns pointed at him.
Do you want to tell us your name?
Not particularly.
But you'll do it anyway. Otherwise, I'm going to blow your head off.
This hardly seems the time for formalities. But if you insist, my name is Zach Ensor, and this box is my family's property. That is my ship on which I intend to depart shortly. I assure you, I have no interest in you or your activities. So kindly step aside and let me be on my way.
A look of startled recognition played across Villa's face upon hearing the name Ensor. He leaned forward and muttered something to Tarrant, who shook his head and gestured to Villa to remain silent before turning to face Ensor.
Ensor, you are incorrect on a few points. Firstly, we are quite familiar with Aurak, which was bequeathed to a friend of ours who would have bequeathed it to us. Secondly, since we have 3 guns to your 1, I don't rate your chances of escape if you were to shoot one of us. So, it seems that your family heirloom and your ship are now to be shared with us. You need to undo whatever you just did to Aurak immediately and help us all get off this miserable tree sanctuary.
Ensor considered Tarrant's words.
You're Blake's people, aren't you? You were supposedly all killed along with Blake, but here you are. Well, 3 of you anyway.
She wasn't one of us.
Blake gave Villa a disdainful look following his response.
So, do you want to tell me exactly who you are?
Tarrant looked at Villa, who shrugged his shoulders and nodded in response. At that moment, Blake jumped in to answer.
You're correct. They are or were Roj Blake's people, or what's left of them. This one is Tarrant, and that one is Villa.
Tarrant stared at Blake.
Okay, Lou, I'm fed up with playing your games. Do you want to tell us exactly who you really are?
Tarrant moved the aim of his gun from Ensor towards Blake as he spoke.
You may be a decent shot, but I think I'm better.
Blake paused for a moment, realizing it was time to break her cover. If they were all going to get off Gouda Prime alive, she knew they stood a better chance working together, or at least trying to.
I am here because Aurak sent a distress signal to me also. Aurak sent it to me because it knew I could be trusted.
Tarrant, Villa, and Ensor all looked at each other quizzically.
I escaped imprisonment on my home planet of Exbar with the help of my mother, Inga.
Villa sent a knowing look in Blake's direction.
My name is Lou Blake, but I am known as Blake.
For a moment there was a silence as the importance of what Blake had said sunk in. Villa's face softened as he looked more intently at Blake and suddenly smiled.
You really are Inga Blake's daughter, then? I thought you looked familiar, and I never forget a pretty face, or someone who was kind to me.
Villa recalled the lovely young woman he had met briefly on Exbar some decades ago.
So that makes you exactly what in relation to Rog Blake?
Tarrant thought the last thing they needed right now was sentimentality, when they should be focused on the opportunity in front of them, finally getting off Gouda Prime.
Rog Blake was my cousin, although I never met him. My mother was trying to build a life for us on Exbar, and having a connection to an enemy of the Federation, an alleged criminal, was a danger she wasn't willing to expose us to. It didn't matter how much she may have admired him and cared for him. I had no inkling about my family legacy until I found and read his journals when I was 20, and...
And you decided to play freedom fighter and get yourself killed by the Federation, just like your cousin?
Tarrant had a sharp edge to his voice, triggered by his own harsh memories from decades earlier, before the isolation on Gouda Prime had extinguished his own idealism.
Playing! Nearly 6 years in prison for a crime I did not commit isn't exactly the stuff of child's games, and I promise you, Tarrant, I am not playing now. I intend to annihilate the Federation or die trying. You are welcome to join me, but if you are too old, tired, and cynical, then I suggest you get out of my way.
The fury in Blake's face gave Villa a disconcerting moment of déjà vu, and he remembered another face, just as intense, just as fanatical. If Villa had entertained any doubts before that this young woman was Rog Blake's kin, they were now swept away. During the exchange, Ensor remained silent. He knew, of course, the legend of the Liberator's crew. Not that the true events had been easy to tease out due to the years of Federation propaganda, but, thanks to his computer skills, he had managed to discover the basics of their history. He had no interest in the cause of Rog Blake and his ill-fated compatriots, but he had often thought that the key to finding Aurak and retrieving what was rightfully his was to attempt to trace the path of the freedom fighters. Why anyone possessing a ship with the capabilities of the Liberator and the most advanced AI in the galaxy would waste such gifts on what was tantamount to suicide, Ensor did not attempt to understand. However, his study of the movements of Blake's crew had proven fruitless, as decades prior to his research, the crew's recorded trail ended on the planet Xenon, after which they vanished, along with any chances, it seemed, of locating and retrieving Aurak. Seeing Tarrant distracted by his exchange with the intense young woman, Ensor saw the chance he had been waiting for. Quietly picking up Aurak, he suddenly started sprinting towards the planet hopper. Bolting up the steps, he frantically began trying to get the door closed. Tarrant caught Ensor's movements out of the corner of his eye and ran after him, making it up the steps of the ship and forcing his way in, as Ensor tried frantically to shut the door manually. The mechanism failed. Shoving Ensor forcefully against a control panel, Tarrant used superior strength that belied his years, and once again he pointed his gun at Ensor's head.
Trying to leave without us, Ensor? That hardly seems polite, given how courteous I've been to you, not blowing your head off and all.
You seemed intent on interrogating that young woman, and frankly, I have no interest in your history. That of your scruffy friend, old Rog Blake's cousin. I have what I came for. I am Aurak's rightful owner, and I intend to leave with it.
Keeping his gun trained on Ensor, Tarrant glanced quickly around the interior of the planet hopper. As he looked, he saw scorch marks across all the control panels, burning metals and plastic strewn on the floor, with scorched wires spewing out of the instrumentation. He instantly recognized the flight controls, as the smell of acrid smoke filled the air inside the ship.
And so, I realize computers are more your forte, and I'm just an aging pilot. But, I assure you, you're not going anywhere on this ship, and unfortunately, neither are we. It would take an engineer with a catalogue of spare parts a few weeks to repair this mess. Since we don't have one, I'd say it's time for you to start thinking a little less selfishly if you want to stay alive.
Darkness was beginning to fall over Gouda Prime. The light usually went quickly at this time of night, and the temperature fell even faster. Nightfall tended to bring out the more unscrupulous characters that frequented the planet, and being stuck out in the middle of nowhere in Plantation 12 was not a wise idea, Villa thought to himself. He turned to where Tarrant had been and found him gone. Not only that, but he realised Blake was now running towards Ensor's ship.
Hey, wait for me! I'm no good on my own.
As he chased after Blake, Villa jumped over the body of one of the dead guards. He noticed the guard had a very distinctive bracelet on his left wrist. The bracelet was plastic and brown in colour, with a red button between two metal strips housed within the plastic casing. Stopping in his tracks, Villa knew how to release the bracelet only too well. He took one from each guard, went over to the strewn altar, and found she had 2 bracelets on her person, one clipped to each arm. Villa paused momentarily to think. He and Tarrant only needed 1 bracelet each, if there was a ship in orbit somewhere. But he reasoned they may need some help somewhere along the line, so he took both bracelets from the altar, one for each member of the unlikely group, if by chance this presented a way off the planet. He put the 4 bracelets in the pockets of his scruffy jacket and headed in pursuit of Blake. He caught up with her, and they both made their way up the steps and through the entrance into Ensor's ship. As they entered, Tarrant drew his gun reflexively.
Jittery, aren't you? It's only us, Tarrant. And by the way, it smells like a bonfire in here.
I think it's fair to say any thoughts we may have had of leaving GP on this ship are well and truly ruined. It's a wreck, and wouldn't even make it off the ground, let alone into space. While it has been nice meeting you both, we need to return a hovercycle to a man who won't be very happy that I can't pay him.
Villa pulled out the small, green navigation and detection device that he and Tarrant used, pressing a small switch on its side. Once again, the device started vibrating loudly, the screen flashing a strong white light more furiously than before.
There's something far more powerful than a normal ship out there.
Shut up, Villa! You know that thing's on the blink, and you also know Deras is not going to be a happy psychopath if we don't return his transport.
At that precise moment, Villa reached into his pocket and tossed one of the bracelets at Tarrant, who caught it and stared back at Villa with a disbelieving look on his face. Villa gave a single nod.
You know what that is, Tarrant?
Well, I recognize it, but how can it be? The technology...
It's the type that built the Liberator, which means that reading isn't an error. Bracelets, altars, and now our tracker picking up a reading of a ridiculously powerful ship.
Villa looked meaningfully at Tarrant.
There is a ship up there. It's where those 3 we killed out there came from. And we need to get up there. Now, Tarrant. This is our way off GP.
It seemed Tarrant and Villa had momentarily deviated from their usual roles. Villa uncharacteristically eager to take a risk, and Tarrant more worried about possible repercussions from Deras.
Even if it is a ship like the Liberator...
Liberator? What? Where?
Not the Liberator, a Liberator, or a similar type of ship. On our travels, we encountered the people that made the Liberator, and you know what? They had other ships just as powerful. That silvery-coloured woman we killed out there, she's one of them. She's an Alta. The bracelets are teleport bracelets, the same as those that were on the Liberator. So are the weapons those three were carrying. They came for Aurak after he contacted them. If there is a ship like the Liberator in orbit, well, maybe we can get up there.
Like I said, even if it is a ship like the Liberator, how do we get on board?
Aurak can get us up there, Tarrant.
Of course he can, Villa. Why didn't I think of that?
Tarrant turned to Ensor and once again pointed his gun at him.
Turn it on.
Oh, I don't think so. We'll all stay here or I will die by your hands. But you can't use Aurak until I reverse a single-use command that I have issued to it.
All right. What do you want, Ensor?
I want assurance that I get off here with you. That's a reasonable request, given you can't leave without my cooperation.
Villa looked at Blake and smiled, tossing Ensor a bracelet.
Villa!
Put that on your wrist, Ensor.
Villa tossed another bracelet to Blake.
And you, Blake. We all have the same odds now.
There you are, Ensor. You have your assurance. Now, as Tarrant said, turn Aurak on.
Blake issued the instruction while aiming a gun at Ensor. Surprisingly, Ensor shook his head.
One of you is going to kill me anyway. You need Aurak, and I have Aurak. It is I who will decide who leaves here, how, and when.
Ensor's hand moved quickly to his belt. Villa smirked at Ensor and smugly revealed the gun that Ensor thought he was carrying, safely in the holster on Villa's belt. Suddenly and unexpectedly, Blake whacked Villa between his shoulder blades, knocking him to the floor as she seized both his weapons.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
Blake looked around at them all, one by one, and then smiled. Slowly, she returned the weapons to Villa and Ensor.
Whether we like it or not, we are all in this together. So let's all get off GP together. We stand a better chance as a group. Agreed?
Ensor looked at Blake, shrugged, and nodded wryly. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and as much as he loathed having to work with others, his best chance of getting off this dreary rock with Aurak was to play along with these renegades for now, he surmised. Villa slowly got up off the floor and rubbed his neck, while clutching the gun Blake had returned to him. He turned towards her.
Not very subtle. And for your information, I'm always more than prepared to come along for the ride.
All right. Seems I am outvoted, and teamwork has become the order of the day.
Ensor turned to Aurak and activated the device with its electronic key.
Aurak, is there a ship similar to the Liberator in orbit around Gouda Prime? And if so, can you activate its teleport system?
Aurak remained silent, at which point Tarrant aimed a steely gaze towards Ensor.
We're working together now, remember? Fix it.
Ensor inserted the small device he had used earlier to render Aurak useless to anyone but himself. As he did so, he aimed a cold and rather disconcerting smile towards Tarrant.
Now try.
Tarrant repeated his question to Aurak.
It is excruciatingly obvious that a ship developed by this system, similar to the ship you previously called the Liberator, is in orbit over Gouda Prime, as I have told you that I contacted the system to retrieve me from here, and they could not resist in their quest to eradicate all risk to them. Despite their advancements since our last encounter, my capabilities are still a primary concern for them. So, logically, having me on their side, or at least in their possession, enhances their position, while also securing my passage from here on one of the most advanced spaceships in the galaxy. It should also be obvious that having been able to control the teleport system on board the Liberator, I would also be able to control the teleport system on the ship currently in orbit.
Charming, isn't it? If I didn't know Aurak was a computer and therefore incapable of petty emotions, I'd say it was very put out at having to depend on humans to rescue it.
Briefly, Blake felt an odd kinship with the irascible computer. In her experience, Humans could be unreliable and let you down when you were most depending on them. But it seemed fate had decided that she needed these 3 strangers, and that she had to find a way to bring them together if her mission was to succeed.
Go state your requirements.
All of you, put your bracelets on and have your guns ready. There may well be an unfriendly welcoming party up there waiting, so be ready. Aurak, teleport us up there. Wherever up there is.
Ensor picked up Aurak, and Tarrant braced himself, remembering the momentarily unpleasant sensation of teleportation. The whole group were temporarily engulfed in white energy as they suddenly disappeared from view. We hope you enjoyed listening to Vindictus, Part 1, Prime Directive, by Louella Richardson and Niamh Shearer. Alta 2 and Zira were played by Amanda Dolan-Harrison. Alta 45, Lisa Shearer. Alta 52, Jill Lewis Williams. Arco and Del Tarrant, Matt McGuinness. Space Commander Arik, Ian Banks. Barrick, Robert Torres. Broadfoot and Kingston, Aidan Artymiuk. GP Official and Zach Ensor, Niamh Shearer. Inga Blake, Catherine Kershaw. Commissioner Lamia, Emma Reid. Lou Blake, Niamh Buckland. Aurak, Supreme Imperator, and Alta 1, Chrisi Pashley. Villa Restal and Zidane, Martin Clothier. Music, Alan Bell. Artwork, Mark N. Harrison. Narration and sound design, Chrisi Pashley. Script editing, Niamh Shearer and Chrisi Pashley. This production is not for profit, fan-created, and does not intend to infringe any copyrights. Everyone involved acknowledges and respects all copyright holders. Any profits gained after costs will be donated to charities chosen by the writers. Coming soon, Vindictus Part 2, Friends or Foes. Details will be available at bit.ly/Vindictusweb. Thank you for listening.